The day my parents sold me, I wore a blue dress. It's funny how certain details stick with you, even a decade later. I remember standing in our cramped living room, listening to my father negotiate my future like I was a used car. My name is Giselle, and I was 18 when my family decided I was worth less than their debt. She's young, healthy, and educated, my father said to the man in the expensive suit. Surely that's worth more than what we owe you. His voice carried that familiar desperation I'd heard so many times before when bill collectors called. I stood there, frozen, as my mother avoided my eyes and my sister Viviana clutched my brother Kirk's hand. The suit, I never learned his name, looked me up and down like I was merchandise. 50,000, he said finally. That covers the debt, plus interest. My father's shoulders sagged with relief. Done. Dad, please, I whispered, my voice cracking. There has to be another way. My mother finally spoke, her words sharp as glass. Be quiet, Giselle. This is happening because of your selfishness. If you hadn't insisted on that expensive college, I had a scholarship, I protested, tears streaming down my face. I only needed help with books and… Enough! My father's voice boomed through the room. The decision is made. Pack your things. That night, I sat on my bed, surrounded by the life I was being forced to leave behind. Viviana appeared in my doorway, her face streaked with tears. I tried to talk to them, she said softly. They won't listen. Did you try hard enough? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. She flinched, but said nothing. Kirk, only 15 then, crept in behind her. Where will you go? To work off the debt, I replied, though I had no idea what that really meant. In the city, they said. The next morning, I was gone. The suit drove me to an employment agency in the city, a fancy name for what was essentially indentured servitude. They placed young people in jobs to work off family debts. It wasn't exactly legal, but desperate families didn't ask questions. I spent the next 3 years working as a housekeeper, sending most of my earnings back to pay off my family's debt. The work was hard, the hours long, but it taught me something valuable: survival. Everything changed the day I met Caesar. He came to the house where I worked, a business meeting with my employer. I was serving coffee when our eyes met. Thank you, he said, actually looking at me instead of through me like most visitors did. His smile was kind, genuine. Later that week, he returned. I was sweeping the front steps. I hope this isn't inappropriate, he said, but would you like to have coffee with me sometime? I almost laughed. I serve coffee for a living. Then let me serve you for a change. That simple conversation changed everything. Caesar was different from anyone I'd ever met. Successful but humble, kind but not naive. On our first date, he listened as I told him about my dreams of finishing college, of building my own life. Why don't you? He asked. I stirred my coffee, avoiding his eyes. It's complicated. Life is complicated, he said, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. Over the next few months, Cesar became my refuge. He never pushed me to talk about my past, but his presence gave me strength. With his encouragement, I started taking night classes while working. One evening, as we walked through the city park, he stopped and turned to me. You're amazing, you know that? He said. Most people would have given up, but you keep fighting. I felt tears forming in my eyes. I'm not amazing. I'm just trying to survive. He took my hand. Surviving is amazing, but you're doing more than that. You're building something. I see it every day. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would do more than survive. I would thrive. And one day, I would show my family exactly what they had thrown away. Looking back now, I realize that moment was the beginning of everything that followed. The day I stopped being just a girl in a blue dress, standing in a cramped living room, waiting to be sold. The day I started becoming someone else entirely. But I had no idea then just how complete that transformation would be, or how destiny would give me the perfect opportunity for revenge. An opportunity I wouldn't hesitate to take. The next 5 years passed in a blur of determination and hard work. I married Caesar 2 years after we met, but I never told him the full truth about my family. How could I explain that the people who should have loved me most had traded me away like a commodity? You're distracted again, Hallie said, snapping her fingers in front of my face. We were having lunch at our usual spot, a small cafe near the business district where we both worked. Hallie had started as my colleague and become my closest friend. Just thinking about the new project, I lied, pushing my salad around the plate. Liar, she said, grinning. You've got that look again, the one that says you're plotting something. I couldn't help but smile. Hallie knew me too well. I applied for the executive position, the one reporting directly to Caesar. Her eyes widened. That's bold. Why not? I've earned it. 4 years of night school, an MBA, and I've outperformed everyone in my department. You know people will talk, she warned. They'll say you got it because you're his wife. I set down my fork. Let them talk. I'm done letting other people decide my worth. That evening, I prepared dinner while Caesar reviewed company reports at the kitchen counter. Our comfortable routine. But tonight felt different. I was ready to take the next step. I applied for the executive position, I said, sliding a plate in front of him. He looked up, surprised. The operations director role? Yes, I sat across from him. And before you say anything, I want you to look at my qualifications, not our marriage certificate. Caesar pushed aside his papers. Giselle, you know I'd never. Please, I interrupted. Just look at my application like you would anyone else's. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, fair enough. 2 weeks later, I sat across from the board of directors, my hands steady as I presented my vision for the company's future. When I finished, the room was silent. Impressive, said Margaret, the oldest board member. But aren't you concerned about the appearance of nepotism? I met her gaze. I'm more concerned about the appearance of passing over the most qualified candidate because she happens to be married to the CEO. There were a few chuckles. I got the job. That night, Caesar brought home champagne. To the new operations director, he said, pouring 2 glasses. You're not worried about what people will say? He set down his glass. Giselle, I've watched you work harder than anyone I know. You deserve this. I felt tears threatening. Thank you for believing in me. Always. He pulled me close. You know, sometimes I wonder about your family. Why they never visit, never call. I stiffened. They made their choice a long time ago. And you made yours? He asked gently. I pulled away, walking to the window. The city lights blurred through my tears. Something like that. The next morning, I walked into my new office, determination burning in my chest. Hallie appeared in my doorway with coffee. Congratulations, boss, she said, setting down the cup. Though I have to ask, why this position? You could have aimed for marketing or finance. I smiled, thinking of the company my family worked for, the one I knew was struggling, the one I'd been quietly monitoring for years, the one that would soon need a buyer. Operations gives me the most control, I said simply. Control for what? I turned to my computer, pulling up a familiar file. Did you know that Midwest Manufacturing is on the verge of bankruptcy? Hallie frowned. The factory in your hometown? What does that have to do with? She stopped, realization dawning. Oh my God, is that where my family works? Yes. I closed the file. And soon they'll need someone to save them. Giselle. Hallie's voice was worried. Are you sure about this? I thought about that blue dress, about standing in that living room, about years of pain and anger and determination. I'm sure, I said. I've worked too hard to stop now. And Caesar, does he know? I shook my head. He will, when the time is right. Hallie sat down, her expression serious. Just be careful. Revenge isn't always as satisfying as we imagine. This isn't just about revenge, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about justice, about consequences. As Hallie left my office, I opened my drawer and pulled out an old photograph. My family, smiling before everything fell apart. Soon, I thought, tracing their faces with my finger. Soon they'll understand exactly what they threw away. Little did I know how quickly soon would arrive. The acquisition happened faster than anyone expected. Midwest Manufacturing's collapse was swift, and Caesar moved quickly to secure the deal. I sat beside him in the corporate jet, my heart pounding as we descended toward my hometown. Nervous? Caesar asked, squeezing my hand. Just tired, I lied. Through the window, I could see the factory's smokestacks rising against the gray sky. The announcement meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I stood at the back of the crowded assembly hall, scanning faces I hadn't seen in 10 years. Then I saw them, my family, sitting 3 rows from the front. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched. Viviana sat straight-backed, her face tense. Kirk, no longer the teenager I remembered, looked so much like our father it hurt. None of them noticed me. Caesar took the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention. Good afternoon, everyone. I know these past few months have been uncertain. I barely heard his speech, too focused on watching my family's reactions. My father leaned forward, hanging on every word. Of course he would. His position as floor manager hung in the balance. I want to introduce you to our operations director, Caesar was saying. She'll be overseeing the transition. My phone buzzed. Hallie. I slipped out into the hallway. Did you do it yet? She asked. He's announcing the acquisition now. They haven't seen me. Are you okay? Before I could answer, the assembly hall doors burst open. People began filing out, talking excitedly about the announcement. I pressed myself against the wall, watching. At least we're not losing our jobs, I heard Kirk say as my family emerged. My father snorted. For now, these corporate types always say that at first. Guillermo, my mother hissed. Not so loud. They passed within feet of me. Viviana paused, glancing my way, then hurried to catch up with the others. Had she recognized me? Mrs. Wagner? A young assistant appeared. Mr. Wagner needs you in the conference room. I followed her, my heels clicking on the linoleum. Inside, Caesar was speaking with the management team, including my father. Ah, here she is, Caesar smiled. Gentlemen, my wife and our operations director, Giselle. The room fell silent. My father's face went pale, then red. My mother, standing behind him, grabbed his arm. Hello, I said calmly, as if I hadn't just walked into my own carefully planned revenge. Shall we begin? The meeting was excruciating. My father couldn't look at me directly. My mother's hands trembled as she took notes. I maintained my professional demeanor, discussing transition plans and efficiency measures. We'll need detailed reports from each department, I said, looking straight at my father. By Friday. He opened his mouth, closed it, then managed a tight, "Yes, ma'am." After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, organizing my papers. I heard the door open and close. You've got some nerve. My father's voice was low, dangerous. I turned slowly. Is that any way to speak to your superior, Guillermo? Don't you dare. Dad? Kirk appeared in the doorway. What's going on? My father's face contorted. Nothing. Let's go. As they left, I caught Kirk's confused expression. He didn't recognize me. He'd been too young when I left. That evening, Caesar and I had dinner at our hotel restaurant. The floor manager seemed upset about something, he mentioned. Did you notice? I took a long sip of wine. Change is hard for some people. True. He studied me. You know, it's strange. When I mentioned you were from this town, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Did he? My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Viviana. I excused myself and went to the hotel lobby, calling the number. How dare you? Viviana's voice was shaking. How dare you come back like this? Like what? Successful? In charge? You know what I mean. Does your husband know about what happened? No, I said, but he will, when I'm ready. Giselle, please, Dad's blood pressure. I laughed harshly. Really? You're worried about his health now? Where was that concern 10 years ago? Silence. Tell me something, Viviana. Did you ever feel guilty? Did any of you? Every day, she whispered. But this isn't the way. You lost the right to tell me what's right 10 years ago. I ended the call. Back at dinner, Caesar noticed my distraction. Everything okay? I smiled, thinking of my father's face, my mother's trembling hands, Viviana's pleading voice. Everything's perfect. And it was. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd planned, but I hadn't anticipated how seeing them again would make me feel. Not just satisfied, but hollow too. Empty in a way I hadn't expected. But it was too late to turn back now. The first week of transition brought mandatory department meetings. I sat at the head of the conference table, watching my father struggle to maintain his composure as he presented his floor reports. Production is down 12%, he said, his voice strained. But with the new equipment, 15%, I corrected, not looking up from my tablet. And the equipment isn't the problem. Your management style is outdated. My mother, who worked in accounting, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My father's face reddened. With all due respect, Mrs. Wagner, he emphasized my married name like a weapon. I've managed this floor for 20 years. And that's precisely the problem. I finally met his eyes. Times change. People who don't adapt get left behind. The meaning wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Kirk, who'd recently been promoted to supervisor, cleared his throat. I have some ideas about modernizing the workflow, he said. I turned to him. Go on. As Kirk presented his ideas, I watched my father sink further into his chair. My mother kept shooting him worried glances. Only Viviana, who worked in HR, maintained her professional facade. After the meeting, Kirk caught up with me in the hallway. Mrs. Wagner, could I have a moment? Of course. He led me to a quiet corner. Look, I can't shake this feeling. Do I know you from somewhere? I studied his face. So young, so earnest. What makes you think that? Something about your voice, maybe? It's been bothering me all week. Before I could respond, my mother appeared. Kirk, your father needs you, she said sharply. Then to me, a word, Mrs. Wagner? Kirk hesitated, then left. My mother's mask of politeness slipped. Whatever game you're playing, stop it, she hissed. Haven't you caused enough trouble? I raised an eyebrow. Trouble? Like the kind that makes parents sell their daughter? We did what we had to do. Her voice cracked. We were drowning in debt. And I was what? Your life raft? Your sacrificial lamb? You were always so dramatic, she snapped. It was a job placement. It was human trafficking. I cut her off. Let's call it what it was. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Keep your voice down. Why? Afraid someone might hear the truth? Cesar's voice interrupted us. Everything okay here? My mother's facade snapped back into place. Of course, Mr. Wagner, just discussing some accounting concerns. That evening, I found Viviana waiting by my car. "You need to ease up on Dad," she said. "Or what? Or I'll tell your husband everything." I laughed. "Go ahead. You think I'm ashamed? You think Caesar won't understand exactly what kind of people you all are?" She stepped closer. "We were desperate. So was I." The words exploded out of me. I was 18 and terrified, and you all just watched it happen. I tried to stop them. Not hard enough. A security guard looked our way. Viviana lowered her voice. "What do you want, Giselle? To destroy us?" "I want you to feel what I felt. Powerless, afraid, at the mercy of someone else's decisions." She shook her head. "You're not that person. The sister I knew died in that living room 10 years ago." Later that night, Caesar found me on our hotel room balcony. "Rough day?" he asked, handing me a glass of wine. "Just business." He leaned against the railing. "You know, it's strange. The floor manager's wife looked at you today well, like she was seeing a ghost." I took a long sip of wine. "Did she? And his son seems fascinated by you." He turned to face me. "Giselle, what aren't you telling me?" For a moment, I considered confessing everything, but not yet. The timing wasn't right. "Just workplace politics," I said. "Change is hard for some people." My phone buzzed, a text from Kirk. "I remembered where I know you from. We need to talk." I deleted the message. "You sure that's all it is?" Caesar pressed. I thought about Kirk's text, about my mother's desperate whispers, about Viviana's threats, about how close my carefully constructed plan was to either succeeding or imploding. "Trust me," I said, kissing him softly. "Everything's under control." But as I lay awake that night, listening to Caesar's steady breathing, I wondered if I was losing control of more than just my revenge. The lines between past and present were blurring, and I wasn't sure anymore which version of me was real, the powerful executive or the scared girl in the blue dress. Maybe they were both me. Maybe that was the problem. I found Kirk waiting in my office early the next morning. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking so much like the teenager I'd left behind that my chest ached. "You're my sister," he said without turning around. I closed the door. "Took you long enough to figure it out." He faced me, eyes red-rimmed. "I kept having these dreams about your voice. Then I found an old video from my 15th birthday. You were singing. 'Happy birthday,'" I finished. "You were tone deaf even then. Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have changed anything?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. "I was just a kid, Giselle. I didn't understand what was happening." "And now?" "Now, he slumped into a chair. "I don't know. Dad never talked about it. Mom would cry if anyone mentioned you. Viviana threw herself into work. We all just pretended you never existed." The words stung more than I expected. "Easier that way, I suppose?" "No," he said quietly. "Not easier, just less painful." Before I could respond, my office door burst open. My father stood there, face purple with rage. "Get away from her, Kirk!" "Dad, now!" He grabbed Kirk's arm. I stood. "Take your hands off him, Guillermo. This is my office, and Kirk is my employee. He's my son." "Like I was your daughter?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Kirk pulled free from our father's grip. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did you really sell her?" "It wasn't like that," our father sputtered. "We were going to lose everything." "So you sold your daughter instead?" Kirk's voice cracked. "My sister? You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "And now everyone else will, too." My father's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "The audit I ordered? It's turning up some interesting things about your management practices. Falsified overtime records, misappropriated funds." "You wouldn't dare." Wouldn't I? You taught me all about making tough choices, remember? Kirk looked between us. Giselle, what are you doing? Justice, I said simply. Or karma, take your pick. My father lunged forward, but Kirk caught him. Dad, stop. You ungrateful. He clutched his chest, stumbling. Dad? Kirk's voice turned panicked. Dad! I was already dialing security. Medical emergency in the operations director's office. Everything after that was a blur. Paramedics, my mother's hysterical crying, Viviana's accusing glares. I stood back, watching them load my father into the ambulance. Caesar found me in my office hours later. He's stable, he said. Minor heart attack. They're keeping him overnight. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Giselle? He sat across from me. What's really going on here? A knock interrupted us. Viviana entered, her face tear-stained but determined. I need to talk to both of you, she said. Viviana, don't. He deserves to know, Giselle. Either you tell him, or I will. Cesar looked between us. Tell me what? I closed my eyes, feeling everything spinning out of control. They're my family. What? The floor manager, his wife, Viviana, Kirk, they're my family, the ones I never talk about. Understanding dawned on his face. The ones who sold her, Viviana finished. We sold her to pay off Dad's gambling debts. Cesar stood so quickly his chair toppled. You did what? It was wrong. Viviana's voice broke. We knew it was wrong, but Dad convinced us we had no choice. There's always a choice, I said bitterly. And this? Caesar gestured around the office. Taking over the company? Was this all about revenge? Not all of it, I whispered. But yes, partly. He ran his hands over his face. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to do this myself. I needed them to see. See what? That you could hurt them back? That they didn't break me, I said fiercely. That what they did didn't destroy me. Viviana stepped forward. No one's arguing that anymore, Giselle. Look at you. You're successful, powerful, respected. You won. But Dad's in the hospital. Mom's falling apart. And Kirk, he's devastated. Good, I said, but the word felt hollow. Caesar touched my shoulder. Is it? Is this really what you wanted? I looked at my sister's tears, thought of Kirk's confusion, of my father in a hospital bed, of my mother's fear, of all the pain, old and new, swirling around us like a tornado. I don't know what I want anymore, I admitted. And for the first time in 10 years, that was the absolute truth. The hospital corridor felt endless as I walked toward my father's room. Caesar had insisted I go, though I wasn't sure why I'd agreed. You're here. Kirk stood outside the door, coffee cup clutched in his hands. Mom's finally sleeping. Viviana took her home. How is he? Stable. Doctor says he needs to reduce stress. Kirk's laugh was bitter. Guess that means you succeeded. That wasn't my intention. Then what was your intention, Giselle? Because I'm trying really hard to understand. Before I could answer, a nurse emerged from the room. He's awake, asking for you. Kirk gestured to the door. After you, sis. My father looked small in the hospital bed, tubes snaking from his arms, monitor beeping steadily. His eyes opened as I approached. Come to finish the job? His voice was weak but still carried that familiar edge. Believe it or not, giving you a heart attack wasn't part of my plan. No. He shifted, wincing. Then what was your plan? Destroy everything I built? Like you destroyed my life? We gave you a job. You sold me. The words echoed off the sterile walls. To strangers. Do you have any idea what that did to me? We were desperate, he whispered. So was I. I was your daughter. Kirk stepped between us. Both of you, stop. Dad's supposed to stay calm. I took a deep breath. The audit found irregularities in your books. My father closed his eyes. I know, enough to justify immediate termination. Giselle, Kirk started. But, I continued, I'm willing to overlook them, on one condition. My father's eyes opened. What condition? Tell me the truth, all of it. Why did you really do it? Silence filled the room, broken only by the steady beep of monitors. Finally, my father spoke. The gambling debts were only part of it, he said quietly. I I was being blackmailed by someone who knew about other things I'd done, illegal things. The money they wanted, selling you was the only way to make it stop. The room spun. You sold me to protect yourself? To protect all of us. If I'd gone to jail? You should have gone to jail. I didn't realize I was shouting until Kurt grabbed my arm. Giselle, please. I pulled away, my voice shaking. All these years, I thought it was just about money, but it was worse. You sacrificed me to save yourself. A commotion at the door interrupted us. My mother burst in, Viviana behind her. What are you doing here? She demanded. Learning the truth, I said. Finally. Olivia, my father called weakly. I told her about everything. My mother's face went ashen. You didn't. He did, I said. And now I have a choice to make. What choice? Viviana asked. Whether to turn him in for fraud or keep quiet and let him retire with dignity. You wouldn't, my mother gasped. Wouldn't I? Like father, like daughter, right? Kirk touched my shoulder. Giselle, I know you're hurt. Hurt? I laughed. Hurt doesn't begin to cover it. Then what do you want? My father asked. Money? Power? You have both now. I want, my voice caught, I want the last 10 years back. I want parents who protected me instead of using me. I want a family that chose me. Silence fell again. Then my father spoke, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, he whispered. God help me. I'm so sorry. I stared at him. This man I'd hated for so long, now looking old and broken in his hospital bed. Sorry doesn't fix it, I said quietly. No, he agreed. Nothing can fix it. But I am sorry. More than you'll ever know. My mother started crying. Viviana moved to comfort her, but she pushed her away. He's right, she sobbed. We can never fix it. Never. I looked at my family, my crying mother, my sick father, my siblings caught in the middle. This was what revenge looked like. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? I'll have HR process your retirement papers, I said finally. The audit findings will stay buried. Giselle, my father started. Don't, I cut him off. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I refuse to be like you. I won't sacrifice someone else's life to save my own pride. I turned to leave, but Kirk caught my hand. Where are you going? Back to work. Someone has to keep the company running. Will we? He hesitated. Will we see you again? I looked at him. My baby brother who'd grown up without me, who'd never stopped wondering about his lost sister. I don't know, I said honestly. I really don't know. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I stood at the podium, watching people file in. My father's seat remained empty. He was still in the hospital. My mother sat rigid in her chair, while Viviana and Kirk whispered together in the back row. Caesar squeezed my hand. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. The room fell silent as I adjusted the microphone. Good morning. As you know, our floor manager is currently on medical leave. In light of recent events, he's decided to take early retirement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I caught my mother dabbing her eyes. But that's not why I called this meeting. I took a deep breath. I owe you all the truth. Many of you have worked here for years, decades even. You deserve to know who's really running your company. Kirk sat up straighter. Viviana shook her head slightly. 10 years ago, I stood in a living room wearing a blue dress, listening to my father, your floor manager, sell me to pay off his debts. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. My mother's sob cut through the noise. I was 18. The company he sold me to masked human trafficking as employment placement. I spent 3 years working off his debt before I escaped that life. More whispers. Someone near the front muttered, "Oh my God." I fought my way back, got an education, built a career, and yes, I orchestrated the takeover of this company. I met my mother's eyes, not just for revenge, but for justice. "You're lying." My mother suddenly stood. "We never—" "Sit down, Mom." Kirk's voice carried across the room. Let her finish. I gripped the podium tighter. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to show that survival is possible, that victims can become victors, that sometimes the best revenge is success." Caesar stepped forward, but I held up my hand. "My husband didn't know until recently. He's as shocked as you are, but this company's future isn't about my past. It's about all of our futures." The silence was deafening. "I'm stepping down as operations director." Now Caesar did grab my arm. "Giselle, I'm promoting Kirk to the position." I looked at my brother. He has the vision and integrity this company needs. Kirk's mouth fell open. Viviana grabbed his hand. "As for myself," I continued, "I'll remain on the board, but at a distance. This company needs healing, not more division." I stepped back from the podium. The room stayed silent for a long moment, then erupted in chaos. People stood, talking all at once. Some approached Kirk. Others hurried to comfort my mother, who had collapsed in tears. Viviana reached me first. "Why?" "Because it's right," I said simply. "But you worked so hard for this position." "I worked hard for revenge," I corrected. "There's a difference." My mother pushed through the crowd. "How dare you? How dare you air our private business?" "Private?" I laughed. "You mean your shame?" "Sorry, Mom, but shame grows in darkness. I'm done hiding." "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "No." Kirk stepped between us. "You and Dad did that 10 years ago. Giselle just brought it into the light." Security appeared at my elbow. "Mrs. Wagner, there's press outside." Of course there was. A story like this wouldn't stay quiet. "I'll handle it," Caesar said, protective as always. "No." I touched his arm. "I will. No more hiding." As I walked toward the exit, Viviana called out, "What about Dad?" I turned back. Tell him I hope he finds peace and that I'm done carrying his guilt." Outside, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But for the first time in 10 years, I felt truly free. "Mrs. Wagner, is it true about your father? Did you really orchestrate the takeover for revenge? What happens to the company now?" I held up my hands for silence. 10 years ago, I was a victim. Today, I'm a survivor. And tomorrow? I smiled. Tomorrow is a new story. Later, in my office, Caesar helped me pack my things. "You know," he said, "when I met you, I knew you were running from something. I just never imagined—" "Are you angry I didn't tell you sooner?" He set down the box he was holding. "I'm angry at what happened to you. I'm proud of how you overcame it, and I'm in awe of your strength in letting go." "Letting go," I repeated. "Is that what I did today?" "Isn't it?" I looked out my office window at the factory floor below, where Kirk was already talking with workers, Viviana at his side. My mother was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I'm just choosing a different kind of power." Caesar wrapped his arms around me. "And what kind is that?" "The power to write my own ending." The morning sun streamed through my home office window as I reviewed the quarterly reports Kirk had sent. Under his leadership, the company was thriving. My phone buzzed. "Hallie, have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. I switched to speaker and pulled up the local news website. The headline made my heart stop. Local business leader dies at 60. My father was dead. I'm coming over, Hallie said. No need, I managed. I have to go there anyway. The drive to my hometown felt different this time. No revenge plotting, no anger burning in my chest, just a hollow feeling I couldn't name. Kirk met me at the factory entrance. I didn't know if you'd come. Neither did I. Inside, workers stopped to offer condolences. Not to me, but to Kirk. To them, I was still just the woman who'd exposed an ugly truth and walked away. That was fine by me. Viviana waited in Kirk's office. Mom's at the funeral home. She doesn't want you at the service. I'm not here for the service. I placed a folder on Kirk's desk. I'm here to sign over my shares in the company. They both stared at me. What? Kirk sputtered. But you're the majority shareholder. And now you will be. I slid the papers toward him. You've earned it. Giselle, Viviana's voice cracked. Dad asked about you. At the end. Don't. He wanted you to know. I said don't. I pressed my fingers to my temples. Whatever confession he wanted to make, he had 10 years to do it. Death doesn't change that. No, a voice said from the doorway, but life can. My mother stood there, looking smaller than ever in her black dress. Mom, Kirk started, let me speak. She stepped into the office. Your father died with many regrets. I'm here to make sure I don't do the same. I crossed my arms. Meaning? Meaning I was wrong. We were wrong. Not just about what we did, but about everything after. The silence, the shame, the anger at you for surviving despite us, not because of us. Pretty words, I said, but they're just words. She pulled something from her purse, a folded blue dress. I kept it, she whispered. All these years, every time I looked at it, I remembered what we'd done to you, what I'd allowed to happen to my baby. Mom, Viviana reached for her, but she stepped away. No, let me finish. She held out the dress. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know, that your father knew, that what we did was unforgivable. I stared at the dress. Why are you telling me this now? Because he couldn't, and because you deserve to hear it, even if it's too late. Kirk touched my shoulder. It's not too late. Not for this. I took the dress, the fabric familiar under my fingers. You know what I remember most about this dress? Not the day you sold me. Not the fear or betrayal. I remember buying it, and you said I looked beautiful. My mother's tears fell freely now. You were beautiful. You are beautiful, inside and out, despite everything we did to break you. I'm not broken, I said softly. Not anymore. No, she agreed. You're stronger than any of us ever were. I looked at the dress, then at my family, what was left of it. Kirk, who'd grown into a better man than our father ever was. Viviana, who carried her guilt like armor. And my mother, finally speaking truth instead of shame. Keep it, I told her, holding out the dress. Keep it as a reminder of what we did, of what never to do again. I signed the papers, making Kirk the majority shareholder. As I stood to leave, he grabbed me in a fierce hug. This doesn't mean goodbye, he said fiercely. I'm not losing my sister again. No, I agreed, just letting go of the past. Outside, the factory whistle blew, signaling shift change. Workers streamed out into the sunshine, nodding respectfully to Kirk through the window. He'd earned their trust, their loyalty. Will you be okay? Viviana asked, walking me to my car. I thought about the long road that had led me here, about revenge transformed into redemption, about the power of truth to heal what time could not. I already am, I said, and meant it. My phone buzzed, Caesar, reminding me about dinner, about our life, our love, our future, about all the things I'd gained by losing my need for revenge. I took one last look at the factory, at the office where Kirk stood watching, at my mother clutching a blue dress like a lifeline. Some things couldn't be fixed, some wounds wouldn't heal completely, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the scars could remind us not of what we'd lost, but of what we'd survived. I started my car and drove toward home, toward Caesar, toward whatever came next. The past couldn't be changed, but the future? That was still mine to write.